Hello, everyone. This is Brian Ferguson, the host of Bumps and Thumps, the talk of wrestling. I want to tell you about a new podcast out called Falls Count Anywhere. It is a classic pro wrestling podcast that brings you the legends of wrestling with true wrestling fans Chris DiCarlo and Charlie Turner. They bring on guests that are legends in this business, and as well as wrestlers of today, promoters, referees, you name it, they have them on there, folks. And I encourage you to listen to them. If you're on YouTube, watch them. They drop every Saturday. They have their podcast. They drop it in the afternoon. So look forward to that podcast coming out. Falls Count Anywhere podcast with Chris DiCarlo and Charlie Turner. Folks, you will not be disappointed. I guarantee it. And enjoy the podcast. Welcome to another edition of Bumps and Thumps, the talk of wrestling. I'm Brian Ferguson. My guest today has been a part of wrestling since she was born.
Yes.
She is a lifetime member of the Cauliflower Alley Club. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce Mrs. Paige Von Hess Sutherland. And I have my sidekick again today, Mr. George Shire. Paige, thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Such a pleasure. It was great to meet you at the Cauliflower Alley Club reunion this past August.
Yes.
In Vegas. Yeah. I mean, I knew of you before. I had seen you the year before. But, you know, and now, from what I understand, you are part of the Queens at the CAC. You are the fourth member.
I certainly am.
With Barbara Goodish, Darla Staggs, and Pamela Morrison. You are the...
What a trio. All of them are good friends of mine. Sweethearts.
Yes.
They are dolls. Such sweet ladies. And I was honored to be crowned after our Mike seminar. I could not believe it.
Just make sure they don't get you into trouble.
Hey,
I know all of them, and especially
you know
Darla.
them very well.
And I know Darla especially. She's a sweetie. So
she certainly is. They all are wonderful ladies.
She just recently left Minnesota here. Just this past month, she retired from her job and she took off, moved to Florida, and she's going to be down there with Barbara Goodish. So
I so love that. It sounds a beautiful place to retire, and with Barbara, like how much better can that be?
Right?
Exactly. Barbara Goodish is just a great lady. So
she is.
And Pam Morrison too. Wow.
Pam is good. Yeah, they're all great ladies. The Queens are all good ladies.
Absolutely.
And now they're international for sure because you live in Canada. I know Barbara's originally from New Zealand. However, she lives in the States. You live in Canada, so now they're truly international.
We certainly are.
All right, Paige, let's talk a little bit. You are the daughter of Kurt Von Hess. I failed to mention that before. I want to get into, if we could, Paige, about you growing up. What was that like? I mean, because your dad, he was pretty, he got a lot of heat in his day when he was healed. He was one of the last ones that from what I've read and understand.
One of the last ethnic heels, yes.
Yeah, ethnic heels. And what was that like for you growing up? What was, let's hear it.
My earliest memory of my dad was I didn't know he was a wrestler at all. I mean, I was only 5, maybe 4 or 5. My earliest memories, he used to have an Orange Crush truck that he would a distributorship of it was Frito-Lay Orange Crush, and that's what because a lot of wrestlers back then had actual jobs and did this stuff on the weekends, and so I didn't know about all this until he came home one day and he took his hat off and he shaved his head, and back then men did not do that. Never. Like, you just didn't see it. Today's society, yeah, everybody
You just
does.
lose it naturally today.
They lose it naturally, yes.
Yeah.
But with my dad, he shaved his head off and he did his hair off. And when he took his hat off, I was playing out front, and I looked, and he goes, "What do you think?" And I'm like, I couldn't believe he did that. And I didn't know why. And I cried and cried, and I went in the house, and my dad came in and comforted me, and he goes, "It's okay. I'm still your dad." And he was telling me about wrestling, and I had not a clue what he did.
Wow.
So he comforted me, and it was just a very shocking thing to see your dad like that. And from then on, he had already been wrestling for several years, since I was born. So my memory is like 4 and 5 years old, and looking at this bald dude, and he ended up turning into Kurt Von Hess. So prior to that, he was Big Bill Terry, and he worked a lot of the Pittsburgh TV, and he used to work Toronto Maple Leaf Gardens, things like that, and the Ohio towns. And then he turned it, that when I saw him with the bald head, that was him turning into Kurt Von Hess. And from there, we ended up going on the road. And we were on the road for 10 years and moved 17 times.
Wow.
Yes, from the age of 5, and we came home when I was 15.
Were you an only child, or did you have other siblings?
No, I also have another sibling, Allison. She's 2 years younger than me.
Okay.
And so my sister and I and my mother and my dad packed up everything. We'd lived in Hamilton our whole lives, and my mom came from Scotland and immigrated here and married my dad. And then from there, we went to Calgary. My dad was called out to Calgary by Stu Hart. And he went out ahead of time, and then we went out, and we had to ship everything out to Calgary. And when we got there, it was in, I think, October of that year. He was in there in September. And by December, beginning of September, he was the champion.
Oh, wow.
And, yes. And he was only 29 years old. And Stu saw something in him that, he had natural talent. He was trained well. And he was trained by Benny Lima, Jack Wentworth, and Al Spittles, who were the 3 main trainers here in Hamilton, Ontario. Okay. And he went out to Calgary and got that championship, which was really hard to do at that time, I realize now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and to have the respect of Stu Hart, that alone, when he recognizes that he has talent, because we all know about the legendary Stu and his dungeon and his training and stretching of wrestlers. So that is great.
Yes, it is. And I do believe my dad was stretched. I think that was like a rite of passage for any wrestler that came in. That is true. That is true.
Yeah. And Stu probably enjoyed it.
Loved every minute of it. I can't do it, but my dad used to do a really good impersonation of Stu. Like I think everybody, a lot of guys did.
Well, if you throw a few Hayes there, what is it? S? How do you say that at the end of the sentence? A? It's raining outside, eh? That's what I remember of
Canadian.
Yeah, kind of the Stu Hart thing.
Yes, we say a lot, and we say sorry a lot.
Oh.
If I don't say sorry 10 times a day, I lose my passport.
Oh,
wow. Well, and saying sorry is good. So
it is.
Did you ever wonder what could have been with the AWA had things gone differently? Had their fortunes gone differently? Had certain wrestlers not left and perhaps more money would have been at the disposal of the Gagnes? Well, wonder no further. You can go to Brad Drake's YouTube channel and experience the 1987 Supermod for yourself, as Brad Drake starts off in May 1987, along with Greg Gagne, Baron Von Raschke, Vern Gagne himself, Nick Bockwinkel, Larry Zabisco, Kurt Hennig, and a slew of others as he plays and saves the AWA.
Let me ask you this, Paige. Your your dad was in Calgary, obviously, champion, young man. You and your sister were pretty young. Your interaction with the Harts. I'm not talking about Stu. I'm talking about all those kids. You had like, what, 15 of them or something like that, I think?
Oh, there's like 12 or 13 of them for sure.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of kids. Did you ever interact with them? Like, I mean...
I did later in life. I'm friends with Diana Hart and Ross. I have met Brett. But when I was younger, my dad used to go to Stu's house. I don't know what they were talking about because I was very clueless to what was going on in the wrestling. My dad kept it very, very separate from our family life. And my dad had to go up to the house, and he would take us along with him because we'd spend as much time as we could together when he wasn't working. And he would take us along for the rides. So we would go up to the house. And I remember it was winter, very cold. And we pulled up, and my dad went in to talk to Stu. And I was sitting in the back seat. And I'm assuming it's Owen or one of the younger kids. We're in the window, and they're going like that at me. And I'm like, well, I didn't, do anything. I just kind of looked, and my dad came out to the car, and I told him what happened. And so I guess a few days later, he told Stu, which I don't know why he would tell him. And whatever kid it was, he got punishment for that.
Oh, gosh.
Oh,
Wow.
Yeah. But he had a lot of respect for my dad, and, to have the respect of Stu Hart, which is one of the greatest promoters ever. My dad really made it young, and his performance was incredible. And just like any wrestler, your stay only lasts so long. And, we were there about 5-6 months, and then it was time to move on. So we ended up in Montreal, and that's when he was with Carl Von Schatz. He met John Anson in Calgary.
Okay.
And John was a lot younger, 7 years younger than my dad or so. And they seemed to team well together. And my dad flew out to Montreal and with Earl Black, who was another kind of heel bald dude. And it didn't quite work out. And then John Anson came out, and then my dad and him created this Kurt Von Hess, Carl Von Schatz tag team, and were rivals for a number of months with the Rougeau brothers, who were also the promoters.
Yes.
Yeah. It's so interesting when you just mentioned John Anson. And
yes.
I believe that was in his original, he was Handsome John Anson.
That's correct.
When he had hair, and he was, because I have programs from him in the Portland territory.
Yeah, he's from the West Coast. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And now he lives on an island somewhere. So.
And I really love what you said when you said you didn't know what your dad did, and he kind of kept it all a secret and everything. And I can't tell you, Paige, how many times I hear siblings of wrestlers that say that. And, that just says your dad not only did his job well in those days, because a lot of times families didn't know what, they did and what it meant. And that was all part of that kayfabe thing that,
it was very strong back then. I mean, I've educated myself as I've gotten older, and now the internet and everything. So much information is available. Right. Back then, my dad kept it so separate because he was so afraid of retaliation from fans, because it really got heated. Yeah. He caused riots with Carl, and he would have people follow him home, and he'd have to talk them down and make them realize that this is my home life now. You're interfering with. My dad had a very diplomatic way of talking people down. He was a more calmer one. Carl was a bit of a wild card. He was young and feisty, whereas my dad had more calmness about him and had to put on the the heel turn when he had to, but he was naturally just a nice guy, very laid back, easygoing guy at home, but as far as protecting us, he didn't tell us a lot about the business. And if we didn't know about it, we couldn't talk about it.
Sure.
And back then you can ask any of the children of the big stars from back then, Pamela Morrison being one. We were not smartened up whatsoever on the business. And I only heard, little chit chat here and there that kind of clued me in. I mean, as you get older, you're like, okay, well, maybe that isn't real. I don't know. But my dad was coming home with rope burns, bruises, black eyes, knee injuries, mat burns, obviously, blood, cuts. But he always maintained a good family home for us, always. Like, he would turn off when he walked in the door. And
one of the things that I always thought was so interesting is because he's playing a bad German, an evil German. And back in that era, still in that era, we weren't as politically correct and sensitive to it like we are today as a society, and we should be. I mean, you couldn't pull that stuff off today. And the fact that your dad was able to become that German, that hated German, that drew so much anguish from the fans and hatred, it's dangerous. I mean, and so I totally understand why he came home the way he did and said, hey, you don't know what I'm doing, and let's leave it that way.
I totally agree. And I'm glad he did, because if I'd have known, I don't think it would have been very good. He would have felt more, he felt at ease when we knew less. He just wanted us to go to school, meet friends, which we didn't get to have friends for very long. My sister was more outgoing than I am. So I was more bookish, and, I kept to myself, but he really worried about us girls, and my mother, of course, being around that environment. And we rarely got to go to matches. I used to watch them on TV.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have any instances where a kid or kids at school did know that he was your dad, or was that really successfully kept from them and you didn't have to worry about any retaliation? Or
no, I always got found out. I would say that in the seminar. Somehow, I mean, wrestling was so, it was crazy back then. I don't know how else to say it. And especially whatever territory we into made the difference. So when we were in Montreal, it was very sheltered. So we didn't see much of anything, because that was really dangerous wrestling. That was like bloody and violent and shoot, a lot of times. And my dad refused to let us see that. And so Montreal was probably the best place as far as a shelter. And we were much younger then too. But as we got older, when I would go to school, I wouldn't tell anyone at all. And somehow somebody would find out. Eventually they would find out. They would see me together with him, at the gas station or something. One little thing. And then all of a sudden I'd go to school on the next day and everybody go, I didn't know your dad was Kurt Von Hess. And it's just like, and I had mixed, I said in the seminar, a lot of boys, young boys, were totally enamored with that. They could not believe that my dad was a wrestler. And what's that like? And they were so curious. But there were a few times where I had difficulty at school, changing schools so much, but also with friends, and actually girls would challenge me to fight.
Oh, boy.
Just because of who my dad is. And, I had a really bad fight that I did not, and I would never initiate a fight. I'm a very easygoing, I'm a lot like my dad, actually. Very easygoing, but not the wrestling part.
You're really
But,
a hated German and you're not telling us.
yes, deep down.
Hey everyone, this is Brian Ferguson. Fans of the AWA, you are in for a real treat. My friend Joyce Postman has just released her book titled My Ringside Seat to the AWA. Joyce writes about her personal experiences with wrestlers such as Nick Bockwinkel, Lord Alfred Hayes, Baron Von Raschke, and others. Joyce also has published many photos from her collection that you will not see anywhere else. Order today by email at joyce.postman@gmail.com. Payment is through PayPal. The book is only $20 plus $6 shipping and handling. International orders, please email Joyce for shipping charge. Folks, run, don't walk to your keyboard, and order today. And enjoy the podcast.
But I did have one challenge in Nashville. My dad was the assassin at the time with Randy Colley. And he was assassin number 2, and he was working in Nashville. So that would have been for Jerry Jarrett, I believe.
Right.
Yeah. And I used to ride the school bus. Anyway, this girl challenged me on the bus. She said, you're Kurt Von Hess's daughter. Show me what you can do. And she pushed me and shoved me. And to the point I went out off the bus. And she got off at my stop, and she beat the living tar out of me.
Oh my!
Oh no!
That's sad.
She broke my nose, she broke my finger.
Really?
Yeah. It was it was a horrible thing. So long story short, she got suspended for a week, this girl, and she was unsupervised. Her father was a truck driver, no mom around. So she was a bit of a wild girl to begin with. She wanted that. And, I ended up getting suspended as well, just to keep me home, away from that for a while. And my dad's always brought us up to not discriminate whatsoever. When we've met a lot of people in our life, fans, people at school, people in our community. And what happened was this girl ended up continuing to antagonize me to the point my mom had to get involved. And my dad really couldn't, given his position. It doesn't look good. Having this big monster of a guy come in and, intimidate this girl who is probably 12 or 11. And, but yeah, she really did some damage, and I was just crushed. And I think that's a point when my dad really realized how wrestling was starting to affect my life. Yeah. And that was the start of him starting to plan for us to come home and have, me be in high school and my sister as well. And have a normal life here back in Canada, because we've been on the road so long.
Yeah. Now your dad,
but this girl just, so when I went back to.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, when I went back to school, these girls of color really liked me. And, and that's what I was getting back to, the discrimination. My dad, I looked at everybody the same. Just love everybody.
Which is good.
It's such a good quality to have. And my dad instilled that in my sister and I. And so when I went back, these girls of color got this girl, and she got it back.
Yeah.
And I said, don't you ever go near her again.
Well, God bless them for that.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, I read your dad had retired in the 70s, was it?
No, he retired in, it was listed as 1986, but it's actually 1989. Yeah, it was. Okay. He was working in Virginia.
Okay. So you're older then, but I mean, as you went through high school, college, were you more involved, I guess? Were you kind of with your dad, like after high school? I'm assuming, you're an adult now and you're going to school.
Yeah.
But did you get involved anything in the business wise, or like help him, or promote him or something like that, or not really, or?
No, not at all, actually. He wouldn't even talk about very much about wrestling at home. I would just hear through phone calls and things like that, but no, I never got involved. He never allowed me to. I don't even know if I would have at the time, because he was his own manager. For many years, he did everything himself.
Yeah.
You know, in the early days, he had, Eddie Creechman or George Cannon, because he wasn't quite good on the mic yet.
Yeah.
But as soon as he got that, he didn't need the manager anymore. He just needed a partner.
Yeah.
So from that, he ended up, having quite a career. But yeah, he really didn't ask too much of me. Although my sister was misbehaving one summer, and he took her on the road because my mother was so sick and tired of her driving us crazy. And he took her on the road and made her sell programs and it was I don't know if you know of Dave McKigney.
Yes. Yep.
The
The
Bear
Bear
Man.
Man. The Bear Man. Yep.
Right. So that summer, my dad worked for the Bear Man, and they went all up in Northern Ontario, and she was gone for like 2-3 months, my sister Allison, and my dad trying to straighten her out, and she loved it. But yeah, she loved it. Yeah, yeah. And my mother needed a break.
Oh, that's funny. So I take it your dad mostly worked Canada. I mean, I know he worked the States some, but was his main hub Ontario, Winnipeg?
No, no.
Well, he
Actually,
was in the Detroit territory with
Detroit was his
Hart.
spot. Yes.
Okay, Detroit was his main spot. Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
I had read that, but you gotta check. You gotta check. Fact
Oh
check.
yeah. No, I understand. Carl and my dad were in Montreal in '72, and the Sheik came there for this big event at Jari Park, which had 27,000 people attend. It was an outdoor event. The previous week, the Rolling Stones they beat their numbers.
Wow.
So they were at this, and of course the Sheik started a riot. He was like up against Johnny Rougeau or Jacques Rougeau, I'm not sure. And he ended up, my dad and Carl had to go into and get the Sheik out, because he was getting there, because once they go crazy, that's it. It's done. Like
Yeah.
you have to get out.
Yeah.
And my dad, and this is a story I've heard from Carl. I didn't even hear this from my dad. So my dad didn't share too many stories. But Carl said that they were sent in by one of the Rougeaus to get the Sheik out of there. And it was getting pretty bad. Things were flying, and, so they got him back. And the Sheik had known my dad in shots, or I say shots, but Carl for quite some, for a while. They were making a name for themselves in Montreal. And the Sheik said, "You got to come and work for me." And sure enough, they were there by October of '72, maybe November. And they ended up winning 5 times for the tag team, NWA Detroit.
Yep.
And my dad won it once with Carl Von Bronner. So my dad actually has 6 NWA tag team title Detroit version. Yeah.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah. And he worked for him for a number of years until it went a bit south, and so other options were coming forward. I know the UWA had started, and my dad also had an opportunity to go down to the Carolinas and work for IWA and Eddie Einhorn.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim or Johnny Powers, along with Ron Martinez.
Yep.
And they ran the IWA, and he was quite successful down there too. He was with, oh gosh, I can't remember now. He had so many partners.
Yeah.
But yeah. So we did a lot in the South, U.S.
Let me ask you this, Paige. When the expansion was going on with WWF when Vince Jr. had taken over.
Mm.
Impacted a lot of wrestlers, a lot of promotions, the territory days. What was that like for you and your family, your dad? Did he ever say anything about it? I mean, I know you didn't talk much, but I mean, by then you were older.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he ever said anything like, I can't believe this guy's doing this, or if he's like, this might be good for the business, or what was his, as far as what was his opinion on the matter?
Early days, my dad worked for Vince Sr. Not consistently, but certainly, he'd take a trip for a week to New York and come back, and just do some matches, and just
That was
and
when he was Bill Terry, right?
that's when he was Kurt Von Hess as well.
Oh, he was. Okay.
Yeah. So my dad would always say, and a lot of other wrestlers used to say, if I could only get in the New York office, that's all they want.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys who had major talent, including my dad, were turned away. And my dad went on to other promotions, and as the years went on, and in the early 80s, mid 80s, when the takeover happened, my dad, that was career ending for my dad almost. It's he went in and he did a few matches for Vince Jr. and basically he was treated like enhancement, and he wasn't. He was more than that. He was more than that.
It was much more than that.
He certainly was. I was just talking to Terry JH, who runs the Maple Leaf Wrestling site here. And he said this morning to me, he goes, even with Maple Leaf Wrestling, the same thing happened. He wasn't put over, and he should have been. He was just one of those guys that he could fit into anything, and he would, and he had the good ring psychology, and he had the experience, and had been in every territory except for AWA, which he never did, and a couple of other small promotions, but most of the major territories he was there.
Wrestling fans, promoters, wrestlers, and anyone who enjoys pro wrestling now have something new to be excited about. The Wrestling Fans International Association, the WFIA, is back. WFIA is an association that exists to promote, grow, and support professional wrestling throughout the world. Membership is free. Your membership includes a free digital bi-monthly publication of the Wrestling Fan News newsletter, association updates, voting privileges, and much more. Please go to thewfia.org, that's THEWFIA.org, and become a member today.
Well, and Paige, what you're describing is what most of the wrestlers felt when that expansion and that takeover that Vince Jr. did. We had all these wrestlers from all these territories that had so much talent and so much to give to the business yet. And there just weren't enough places for them. And Vince was more content on embarrassing people at that point and only making stars of guys that he wanted to go with his expansion route. And so, good wrestlers, they'd come in and be, you're going to job for this guy or that guy. And I don't have room for you in my territory and then as he's taking the territories down, there's no place for these wrestlers to then go to. And that's what made that whole thing so sad.
It was sad, and my dad was sad about it.
Yeah.
It was career crushing because those territories, that was his bread and butter.
Yeah.
And he couldn't go back to them because it was all bought up and conglomerated into one big thing. And you're absolutely right when you say that. I saw guys I've seen matches where they are humiliated. And it really upset me back then when I just saw a match recently of my dad wrestling with one of the Vachons, Paul Vachon, and my dad, and it was the Blue Demons. And these guys are like veterans, and and it was like 1983, 84, and Vince brought him in and put him on TV, and made these Blue Demons look like they're like the be all end all. And here's these two guys who could out wrestle anybody.
Yeah.
And we're so tough,
Yeah.
and but it was all at his direction. And then my dad had enough. He says, I'm not going to be, he would walk away before he would be humiliated.
Yeah.
Boy, I've heard guys say that to other wrestlers that they just decided to leave the business rather than let this happen at the end like this.
My dad actually retired for about, sounds, but this is wrestling, don't forget, 8 months. He took 8 months off and tried to do a regular job. And, he was just so disheartened by the whole thing. And he tried to do that straight, the normal life. And he ended up back in it again. And, as soon as he got a lead and he was back down into Mid-South for Bill Watts. So, yeah. And that's where he ended his career.
Okay. Wow. I tell you, it, like George said, it was so sad how everything went down. I always have felt, even as a kid, because I grew up in Wisconsin, George is in Minnesota, but I watched AWA, Vern Gagne. I mean, every Sunday morning before church, it was on, and I would watch it.
Some people didn't go to church to watch.
Yeah.
That was more important.
Yeah. Well, I had to be careful because my parents
was like church.
It was.
My parents weren't fans of it, so I had to be very careful. When they'd see it on, they'd turn the channel. But when I was at my grandma's, I was good. My grandma let me watch it, and my dad and mom couldn't say anything because it's my grandma, and that's my mom's mom. So they're not, yeah. Anyway, what my point is that I just felt like, like your guys like your dad and others that were kind of put out to pasture because of whatever reason, and they didn't have any other opportunities because he was putting everybody else, either out of business or buying them up.
Yes.
And I feel like even now today, and maybe you can expand on this more, that you got 2 or 3 big ones now. You got Impact up in Canada. That's a big one up there.
Yeah.
And then you got WWE here and AEW. That's the 3.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is, indie, which is not a bad thing. Indies are great. Don't get me wrong, but I'm saying they're not on TV. They're not, they're not getting that exposure.
No.
What is your opinion on that today? As far as, do you watch the product, or do you just kind of like just watch your dad's old videos and some other old ones on YouTube, or what's that? What do you do with that?
You know what? First of all, before my dad passed away in 1999, he was obviously watching the Attitude Era. Mm-hmm. So at that point, he was disappointed that there weren't proper wrestling moves, lots of sex, lots of storylines rather than wrestling. I mean, Dad was old school. Everything was old school. You go in he didn't practice before a wrestling match. He didn't do maybe he would have written down a few notes or whatever, of what is going to happen. But other than that, he just knew what he had to do. And, back then those guys just got in the ring and did their thing.
Exactly.
He didn't like it was so choreographed. And, obviously for TV, you have to do that. And during that era, but he really was disappointed. But at the same time, he watched it every week.
Yeah. Go ahead.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier, Paige, is, that you had moved 17 different times and you were in these territories. And right there, you're explaining how the business was when we had all these various territories around the country, where there were probably 3,000 wrestlers that were making money and could go, when they got old or stale in a certain territory, they could move on to another one. There was a place to go. Sometimes they did it out of necessity. And then when that territorial system was taken apart, Now they didn't have a place to go. If they didn't work for Vince, they didn't have a place to work, or at least a place to go to make a decent living.
That's
And
right.
you've just described it best. Plus how hard it was for you as a child growing up, where you're in the different school every year, not forming solid friendships, which is basic to a childhood. You have my empathy with that. It's
Yeah.
It wasn't easy. No, it wasn't. But we didn't know any other way.
exactly.
We were brought up very young in the wrestling business. Well, away from the wrestling business, but in it. I could.
Right.
I mean, I used to have friends like in Montreal. Their dads were wrestlers. We didn't know their dad, or they didn't know my dad. We were just friends.
Yeah.
You know, my dad could have been in the ring with her dad that night and beating the crap out of him. I don't know. But we had, very hard to keep friendships. The most dearest friendship I had was with Afa, the Wild Samoan's daughter, Monica. I mentioned that also in my seminar, and how I have a great relationship with Afa. He is my dad. When my dad passed away, he came to me. We've been friends for many, many years. We used to live in the same territory, same houses, hotels, whatever. We were like gypsies living together. It was just a wonderful time in the 70s, and, just so free. And, we just would go around as a big family. It'd be Afa and Sika and their wives and their kids. But Monica and I, that was probably the most solid friendship I had as a child, because she could relate to the way we lived.
Yeah.
And we could relate to each other. I didn't have anyone who could understand the way I lived.
Yeah.
Very hard to explain to somebody.
Yeah. Wow. I tell you, I was in the military 26 years. We probably moved about quite a few times. I don't know if it was 17, but it was probably close. And it's hard on a kid. Even in that business, it's hard. And
I can imagine.
I got to say, for you, I mean, moving around that much, you're so bubbly and very happy and positive, and that's great, because some kids unfortunately take a different path when they get older, and go left instead of straight or right. And so I commend you, and I commend your mom and dad for raising you like that. So
I had very protective, loving parents. Unfortunately, they're both passed away now. God bless them. But they ruled. They were like our protectors. They watched over us. If my dad was absent a lot too, so you have to keep that in mind. So my mother would have to really watch what's going on. Because it's such a dangerous business, and back then, no political correctness, no manners, nothing. We had one time where, it was we weren't allowed to go to the matches very often, and the one time in Cloverdale, BC, we were working. My dad was working for Gene Kiniski, and he ended up having a match with Sika, the Wild Samoan. And it turned into pretty bad. And we would always go out to the car ahead of time, and somebody would let us know from the back, hey, you better get to the car, because it's all about timing, just make sure we're safe, get out, and we're sitting in the car, and we see my dad running out of the door with a trail of people behind him, throwing cups of urine and garbage and lit cigarettes, and and him still in his gear, just, and blood coming down his head from the match. And he got to the car and got in the car barely, and then they started rocking the car. I thought it was going to go over on the side. And some police and some other workers, wrestlers, came out and got them away, and we took off. And I just remember looking at my dad, seeing this garbage all over him and how smelly he was, and I thought, oh my God, he was just so humiliated. But it's the nature of the business.
I was going to say, unfortunately, that was the nature of the beast back then. Yeah,
he did his job.
he did his job well because he was so hated.
Yeah.
People loved to hate him. I have people today saying, I hated your dad. I hated him with all my everything. Like they just, but they're so respectful to me as his daughter. And I continue to, you know, praise him and make sure that he is out there and well known for his accomplishments.
You know, it isn't often that I say this or that I have said this, but you know, back in that era when they were living that gimmick, be it the ethnic villain or heel, and so hated, and they got over so well with it. And as you say, they were so hated.
Yes.
In a lot of ways, it's better today that the business is open as it is, because now people are able to understand that it's like an actor on TV. They're playing a part.
That's right.
That they may not be that persona, that bad guy that, you know, they're perceived to be and want to be during that wrestling card.
Yeah. Yeah. I find the emphasis
in my era, that's what it was. You had to get over and be hated and do it well.
Do it well. And that's the thing. If my dad heard boos, you know, and you know, them, you know, really digging into him, that's money to him.
Yep. Exactly.
That's music to his ears when he hears that, because that's money, and people don't realize that. So I would go, I very rarely go to the matches, but when I had gone, I'd see him in there, and you know, he'd just have this way about him where he would scare everybody. He'd just come in and have his eyes bulging out, and he would just he'd find a kid in the audience, a little boy, maybe 10, 12, and he would hold on to the tag rope, and he'd just look over at him, and he'd just keep looking at him. And then it got worse and worse, and he'd get to the point he'd make the kid cry, and the parents consoling the kid, and it's just like, that's him doing his job. Because that kid's gonna go watch him on TV and remember that, and tell his friends. So that it's all by word of mouth back then.
Oh yeah.
I tell you, I agree with George. The only thing I think today is that's not good is if you're in a feud with somebody, right? And then they do the match or whatever, and then 20 minutes later, they're on social media, you know, arm around each other, and you know, great match, you know, blah blah blah. That's the only thing I don't.
Well, I don't care for that at all either.
I mean, I no, I'm just pointing that out because I think today it's I don't know how to say it, but it's not as good as it used to be, in my opinion, too. You know, I'm 52 years old. I grew up in the 80s, late 70s, 80s, watching this, and I seen it make much a turn in my adolescence, you know, making this huge turn. And, you know, the Attitude Era, like when your dad watched it and stuff. And I was in my 20s then, late 20s. I didn't really care for it either. I thought it was a little too much. I mean, this is about wrestling, not guys trying to get girls and do inappropriate things on television. That's another channel.
No.
That's another channel at another program at a later time in the evening that stuff can be done. But anyway, what I wanted to ask you one more thing before we go, unless George has anything, is that what are you up to now? Are you doing anything with the business, or do you watch it, or what's going on with Paige Von Hess Sutherland?
Well, right now I do keep up on matches because, you know, I always, I've found that, you know, since my dad's passed, I just dug in and found information on him as much as possible and his career. And with that, I end up catching other stories, and then it comes to today. And, you know, we have, you know, a lot of second, third generation wrestlers that come from my dad's era. You know, they're the kids, and, you know, and such, you know, like Cody Rhodes or whoever. And,
Mhm.
I just watch some of it out of interest. I don't watch it regularly. I just watch little clips. But I have to say my dad would be even more disappointed today. Like you say about the arms around each other. I went to an independent match not long ago, and I was in the audience, and I am so used to old school wrestling. And when I saw this, I thought my dad would just lose his mind over this. Um, we're all seating to watch this match, and two wrestlers who are about to have a match, were out talking to fans in the audience before the show. And I'm like, where's the mystery here? Where's the magic, that I know?
Mhm.
It wasn't there. And it
Yeah.
really, that was disappointing. And my dad would, I would never see him when he entered an arena. And if I was at the match, I would not see him at all. Like
Yeah.
he would peek behind the curtain and give me a wink. That was it. Cause I knew he was there.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Otherwise, he didn't communicate. He didn't even acknowledge. We didn't. We went into a match. We'd sit in the audience, and we were not allowed. That's when we were not allowed to say anything. We kept our mouths shut, and that's the only way we would get to come back again. Otherwise, because he was so
Yeah.
afraid of somebody coming at us. But
Yeah.
the magic is gone completely. There's no heel baby face situation anymore. I find it's just
Yeah.
like two guys getting in, and the skill itself. I won't.
Yeah.
Like,
It's okay. Let it out.
where are the moves? Where are they?
Well, and
I don't see
Paige, when you talk about all of this, back in that era with kayfabe and making it real, living it real for the fans, any promoter in a territory, they would literally fine or get rid of wrestlers if they broke that kayfabe. And if you had two wrestlers that were on opposite sides, and you're in the middle of a program together and you're seen together, that wasn't good, and you're gone because you've just broken the whole code of secrecy.
Well,
and
that happened to us. My
yeah,
dad, when we were in Calgary, my dad had an angle with, I mentioned this in the seminar, John Quinn and him had an angle going. And my dad and John Quinn were very good friends.
Yep.
We obviously were kept away from everything, so we didn't know. And we're having dinner at this little restaurant in downtown Calgary, and with John and my dad. And these fans come around and they start pounding on the window, and they see us and like, what are you guys doing to get, like, really upset? And we had to get moved. My dad ended up going to the back of the restaurant, so he wasn't seen at all. And then we all moved to the back because they went mental. And, Stu was really, really ticked off about that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Like, that's how secretive it was.
Yeah.
I didn't even know.
Well, I don't know if you've ever heard of the wrestler Eddie Sharkey. Eddie Sharkey. He was a really good hand and wrestler in the 60s. And he trained a lot. He trained the Road Warriors and people like that. But Eddie made a comment. He said that his own parents went to their graves believing that what he did in the ring was real. He said that's how much it was instilled into him, that you don't blow the whistle. You don't talk about it.
No.
Yeah.
And I think that pretty well sums it up.
I agree. It was almost like a lot of people compare wrestling in that era with the kayfabe to a brotherhood, like a mafia.
Oh yeah.
Same way of thinking, the way you protected each other in the business, same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No,
Very,
totally
very, very quiet. Yeah.
All right. Well, George, you have anything to add, sir?
No, I think we've pretty much covered it. I'm delighted that we had a chance to meet, and I agree with Brian. You're very bubbly and upbeat, and I love sharing, hearing your stories because
thank you. I've got a million of them.
Well, maybe you come on again some other time if you want to discuss more.
I certainly can.
Yeah, I appreciate it. One more time, ladies and gentlemen, the daughter of Kurt Von Hess, Paige Von Hess Sutherland. Ma'am, thank you for coming on today. The newly inducted fourth queen with the CAC trio of Darla Staggs, Barbara Goodish, and Pamela Morrison. Thank you for coming on today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you,
Thank you,
George.
Dan.
I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, folks, if you're watching, thank you. If you're listening, thank you. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so, and we will talk to you soon.